The moment I stepped into my sister Emily's wedding venue, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. The place was stunning, filled with flowers and decorations that I had spent countless hours arranging. As the designated planner, I was expected to make everything perfect while she basked in the spotlight, and that burden weighed heavily on me. I watched her flaunting her happiness, completely oblivious to the sacrifices I had made to make this day happen. My stomach twisted in knots as I felt the underlying tension in our family dynamics, where I had always been the less favorite. There was an unspoken rule that I had to be the good sister, the one who never complained, always there to support Emily no matter what. I knew the stakes were high. If anything went wrong, it was on me. As I moved around adjusting the last-minute details, I could hear the chatter of guests and the laughter echoing through the hall. It was supposed to be a joyful day, yet I felt like I was suffocating. Just as I prepared for the ceremony, I overheard a conversation between two of Emily's friends that hinted at something shocking. My heart raced as I realized that I had to make a choice before the day spiraled into chaos. Did I want to continue being the doormat? Or was it finally time to stand up for myself? I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. I had spent years being the one to hold everything together, and now on her big day, I felt my own joy slipping away. As I stood at the entrance watching the guests arrive and Emily glide through the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I felt trapped in a role that I was tired of playing. I had to decide if I would keep letting my sister walk all over me, or if I would finally assert myself on this day that was supposed to be about love and celebration. It was a turning point for me, and I could feel the tension building inside. The secret I had just overheard might be the key to changing everything, but I was scared. What if I was wrong? What if I destroyed her day? But the thought of remaining silent while I suffered in the shadows was unbearable. It was time to confront the chaos that had become my life. For as long as I could remember, being the good sister meant being a doormat. I was the one who always picked up the pieces, the one who everyone turned to when something went wrong. I had organized Emily's birthday parties, spent weekends helping her with school projects, and now I was knee-deep in planning her wedding. My parents never missed an opportunity to praise her, while subtly reminding me of my shortcomings. They would say things like, "Emily is so talented, isn't she?" Or, "You really need to step up your game, Sophia. Look at how well Emily is doing." It was exhausting, and the unspoken rule was clear. I had to be at her beck and call, or I would be labeled selfish. The costs were piling up. I spent weeks coordinating every detail of the wedding, from the flowers to the seating arrangements. My time was consumed by meetings with vendors, late-night phone calls, and endless lists. I had even dipped into my savings to cover some of the costs because Emily insisted on things that were way over budget. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, going over my dwindling bank account, feeling the knot in my stomach grow tighter. I was sacrificing my finances for her grand day, and for what? So she could shine while I faded into the background? Each favor I granted felt like another brick in the wall of resentment. I put my own life on hold to make sure that everything was perfect for her. My friends would call wanting to hang out, but I always had to decline. "Sorry, I have to help Emily with something for the wedding," I would say, feeling guilt wash over me. It wasn't just the time lost. It was also the emotional toll. I watched as my friends moved on, got promotions, and found love, while I was stuck in this endless cycle of putting Emily first. And let's not even start on my mental health. I was on the verge of a breakdown. I could feel the resentment bubbling up inside me. I was angry at Emily, angry at my parents, and most of all angry at myself for allowing this to happen. Every time I heard someone compliment her or see my parents beam with pride over her achievements, it felt like a dagger in my heart. I wanted to scream, "What about me?" But instead I smiled and nodded, pretending everything was fine. As the wedding day approached, the pressure mounted. I felt like I was living in a pressure cooker. The closer it got, the more I realized how much I had sacrificed. I was losing myself in the process. I had to remind myself of who I was outside of being Emily's sister, but that person seemed to have disappeared. I spent sleepless nights tossing and turning, wondering if there was a way out. I wanted to be supportive, but I also wanted to be seen and valued. I wanted to be more than just the shadow of the bride. When I overheard Emily's friends gossiping about her upcoming wedding, I felt a mix of anxiety and dread. They praised her and talked about how perfect everything was going to be, but I felt like a ghost in the room, invisible and unappreciated. I was the one who had worked tirelessly to make this day happen. Yet here I was feeling like an outsider in my own family. I realized I was at a crossroads. I had been the good sister for far too long, but at what cost? I was tired of being the one who held everything together while my own happiness crumbled. I knew I had to make a choice before the day spiraled into chaos. Did I want to continue being the doormat? Or was it finally time to stand up for myself? My heart raced as I contemplated the idea of confronting Emily. What if she reacted poorly? What if I ruined her day? But as I looked around at the sparkling decorations and the eager faces of the guests, I knew that I couldn't keep suffocating under the weight of my own sacrifices. It was time to take a stand. As the ceremony began, I was running around adjusting last-minute details, trying to keep everything on schedule. The music started playing, and the guests were seated, their chatter fading into a soft hum. I felt a rush of anxiety as I checked the floral arrangements one last time, making sure everything was perfect. But just as I turned to grab the bouquet, disaster struck. The wind caught one of the floral arrangements, and it toppled over with a loud crash, scattering petals everywhere. Emily, standing at the front in her pristine white dress, shot me a glare that could cut glass. "Sophia, how could you let this happen? You're ruining my wedding." Her voice rang out, piercing through the room like a siren. The laughter of the guests stung my ears, a sharp reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation as I scrambled to clean up the mess. I could see the smirks on some of the guests' faces, and I couldn't help but feel like I was the punchline of a cruel joke. Later, as I was cleaning up the remnants of the floral disaster, I noticed Emily's phone buzzing on the table. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced at the screen to see a message notification from Mark's best friend, Jake. My heart raced as I opened the message, fully aware that I was crossing a line. But what I found made my stomach drop. It was a string of flirty texts, and the last one read, "Can't wait to see you later. I'll make sure no one finds out about us." My mind was spinning. Emily was having an affair? With Mark's best friend? It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. I was no longer just a scapegoat in her life. I suddenly had leverage. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was no longer the invisible sister. I had something that could change everything. As I stared at the screen, the weight of the secret pressed down on me. I had a choice to make. I could either keep this information to myself and continue being the doormat, or I could use it to finally stand up for myself. The thought of confronting her sent shivers down my spine, but the idea of remaining silent while I continued to suffer in the shadows was unbearable. A part of me felt guilty for even considering using her secret against her. After all, she was my sister and this was her wedding day. But another part of me felt a surge of power. I had spent years being belittled, always in her shadow, always the one who had to pick up the pieces. Now I had the chance to turn the tables. I could make this day about me for once. As I stood there, my heart racing, I could feel the tension building inside me. I had been pushed to the edge and I was tired of being the one who always came second. I had to remind myself that I deserved to be treated with respect. The ceremony proceeded, and I watched Emily exchange vows with Mark, her smile radiant and her eyes sparkling with love. But instead of joy, I felt a pang of sadness mixed with anger. How could she stand there and act like everything was perfect when I knew the truth? I knew I had to act. I could feel the moment approaching when I would have to confront her. It was time to stop being the silent supporter, and start being the sister I truly wanted to be. The sister who stood up for herself, who demanded respect. I didn't want to be the one who always sacrificed her happiness for the sake of others anymore. As the ceremony concluded and the guests began to mingle, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I made my way towards Emily. I was nervous, but deep down I knew I had the upper hand. It was my turn to speak up, to be seen. I couldn't keep being the doormat. It was time for the world to know my truth. Taking a deep breath, I approached Emily right before the reception. The atmosphere was buzzing with excitement, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way through the crowd, each step heavier with the weight of what I was about to do. As I reached her, her radiant smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. "Sophia, why do you look so serious?" she asked, brushing a stray hair from her face, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I took another deep breath, steadying myself. I won't be your punching bag anymore, Emily. If you want me to keep covering for you, you need to start treating me like a sister, not a servant. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I felt a surge of empowerment. It was time to draw the line. I had always been the one to pick up the pieces, the one who was expected to be there no matter what. And now, after everything I had sacrificed, I was done. Emily's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to anger. What are you talking about? You're being dramatic, she snapped, her voice rising above the chatter of the reception. I wasn't backing down. Not this time. No, I'm not being dramatic. I'm tired of being the one who does everything for you. You don't appreciate me, and if you continue to belittle me, I will reveal your secret. You know what I mean, Emily. The affair with Jake. The look on her face was priceless. It shifted from disbelief to rage in an instant. You wouldn't dare, she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. I held her gaze, refusing to flinch. Try me. I'm not afraid anymore. You've made me feel like I'm invisible for too long, and I'm done. If you want me to keep your secret, you need to show me some respect. I deserve that much. Emily laughed, but it was a hollow sound devoid of humor. You think you can threaten me? You're ruining my day. Her voice was loud enough to draw the attention of a few guests nearby, their eyes darting toward us in curiosity. I'm not trying to ruin your day, Emily. I'm trying to reclaim mine. You've made it clear that I'm nothing more than a background character in your life, but I deserve better than that. I've spent years being your doormat, and I'm done being the good sister who gets trampled on. The tension hung thick in the air, and I could feel the eyes of the guests on us, some intrigued, others shocked. I stood my ground, feeling the adrenaline surge through me. I was tired of being silent, tired of being the one who always sacrificed her happiness for the sake of others. I had spent so long in Emily's shadow, and now I was finally stepping into the light. You're a selfish brat. You don't care about anyone but yourself. She spat, her anger boiling over. And you think it's okay to treat me like garbage because you're the bride? I'm done letting you walk all over me. You think this is just your day? Well, I'm part of this family too, and I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter. I shot back, my voice firm. Emily's face turned a shade of red that I had never seen before. It was a mix of embarrassment and fury, and for a moment I thought she might actually come to her senses. But deep down I knew better. I had seen her react this way too many times before. Always with anger, never with remorse. You're making a huge mistake, Sophia. You think this will end well for you? She warned, her voice low and threatening. No, the mistake was letting you treat me this way for so long. I'm choosing to stand up for myself now. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. If you want to maintain this facade of the perfect wedding, then you need to start treating me like a sister who deserves respect. Otherwise, the truth will come out, and you'll have to face the consequences. I could see the gears turning in her mind, a mixture of anger and realization dawning on her. I had never spoken to her like this before, and I could tell it rattled her. The reception was still buzzing around us, but in that moment, it felt like we were in our own world, the noise fading into the background. I had finally set a boundary, and it felt good to stand my ground, even if it was terrifying. You're crossing a line that you can't uncross, Sophia, she finally said, her voice dripping with venom. Maybe it's time someone did, I replied, feeling a rush of empowerment. I had finally taken a stand, and whatever happened next, I was ready to face it. As I turned to walk away, I could feel her eyes burning into my back. The tension between us was palpable, and I knew this was just the beginning. I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life, and I wasn't going to let her tear me down anymore. It was time for a change, and I was ready for whatever came next. As the reception began, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The guests were mingling, laughter echoed off the walls, and I felt the pressure mounting like a weight on my chest. Emily was in the center of it all, glowing in her wedding dress, while I stood in the shadows, invisible again. I could feel the eyes of her friends on me, expecting me to continue playing the supportive sister, the one who would always be there to help, to serve, to make everything perfect for her. Mark's family was there too, and they looked at me with those polite smiles, as if they knew I was the one who had put this whole event together. They wanted me to be the silent partner, the one who would fade into the background while their precious daughter basked in the spotlight. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger bubbling beneath the surface. This was my moment to shine too, but I was stuck in a role that had been forced on me for years. As I moved through the crowd, I overheard snippets of conversation. Comments about how perfect Emily looked, how lucky Mark was to have her. Each compliment felt like a dagger in my heart. I was the one who had sacrificed my time, my energy, and even my savings to make this day happen. Yet here I was, just a forgotten piece of the puzzle. Emily's friends gathered around her, whispering sweet nothings about how amazing she was. I felt like a ghost, hovering on the edges of their conversations, desperate to be seen but too afraid to speak up. "You can't let her down now, Sophia. This is her big day," they said, as if I had any choice in the matter. The guilt trip was palpable, and I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. It was the same old story. If I didn't step up to help, I would be labeled as selfish. I had been fed that narrative for so long that I almost believed it myself. My friends had tried to warn me, to tell me that I deserved better, but I had brushed them off, convincing myself that being the supportive sister was my duty. But now, as I watched Emily's laughter fill the room, I felt the anger rising within me. I could feel the tension building with each passing moment. The guests were eagerly awaiting the toast, and I knew that this was my moment to either break free or let myself be crushed under the weight of Emily's expectations. I had to stand firm. I had to break this cycle of being the invisible sister, the one who always had to play second fiddle. But it was easier said than done. The pressure was mounting, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. As Emily's friends began to reminisce about their childhood memories with her, I felt a knot in my stomach. They laughed and joked, completely unaware of the sacrifices I had made to be here, to make this day a success. I felt the guilt creeping in again, that familiar feeling that I was somehow wrong for wanting to be recognized, for wanting to be valued. But I had to shake it off. I could feel the moment approaching when I would have to act. I had to stop being the silent supporter and start being the sister I truly wanted to be. The thought of standing up and exposing Emily's secret terrified me. What if she reacted poorly? What if I ruined her day? But the alternative was even worse. Remaining silent while I continued to suffer in the shadows. I didn't want to be the one who always sacrificed her happiness for the sake of others anymore. As the guests began to gather for the toast, I felt my heart racing. The anticipation in the room was thick, and I knew this was my moment. I had to act. I was tired of being the invisible sister, the one who always stood in the background while Emily took center stage. It was time for me to reclaim my voice, to take a stand and demand the respect I deserved. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I made my way to the front, the microphone in sight. My hands were shaking, and my heart pounded in my chest. I was scared, but I was also determined. I had to do this. I had to speak out, not just for myself, but for every moment I had felt belittled, every time I had been ignored, every time I had sacrificed my happiness for her. As I approached the microphone, I took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of the crowd on me. I knew I was about to make a choice that could change everything. I was ready to stand up for myself, ready to expose the truth, and ready to take control of my own narrative. During the reception, the atmosphere was electric, but I could feel the tension mounting within me. Emily's friends were gathered around her, laughing and reminiscing about old times, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I felt like a bomb ready to explode, and the pressure was suffocating. Everyone expected me to be the supportive sister, to blend into the background while they celebrated her perfect day. But I was tired of being invisible. I was tired of being the one who always faded away in Emily's shadow. As the guests began to bring up the mishap with the flowers, I could see the excitement in their eyes, waiting for me to laugh it off, waiting for me to play my part in the scripted performance of the day. But I stood silent, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel Emily's frustration growing as she caught my eye, her smile faltering. This was my moment to act, and I knew I had to seize it. The moment came when Emily was supposed to make a toast. She stood up, glass in hand, and the room fell silent, all eyes on her as she began to speak. I could see the pride radiating from her as she thanked everyone for being there, for supporting her on this special day. But as the words flowed from her lips, I felt the anger boil inside me. I had spent so long supporting her, sacrificing my own happiness and well-being, and now it was time to change that narrative. With a rush of adrenaline, I stood up, my heart racing. I couldn't hold back any longer. I marched toward the microphone, every step feeling like a leap into the unknown. The room was buzzing with anticipation, and I could feel the eyes of everyone on me, some surprised, others curious. As I reached the front, I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. The room fell silent, and I felt the weight of every eye on me. I continued, "Emily has been hiding something from all of you. She's been having an affair with Mark's best friend." Gasps filled the air, and I watched as shock washed over Emily's face. The laughter that had filled the room moments before vanished, replaced by a tense silence. I couldn't flinch. I had expected chaos, but the silence that followed was deafening. I felt a rush of liberation coursing through me. I had finally taken a stand. Emily's face turned crimson as she realized what I had just done. Instead of remorse, she exploded in anger. "You ruined my wedding, Sophia. You're the one who's selfish." Her words dripped with venom, but I stood firm, a sense of empowerment washing over me. The guests began to murmur among themselves, some backing me up, others shocked by what I had just revealed. I could see Mark's face turn pale, the reality of the situation hitting him like a ton of bricks. He looked at Emily, bewildered, as if trying to process the betrayal. The facade of the perfect couple began to shatter right before my eyes. "How could you do this to me?" Mark yelled at Emily, his voice filled with disbelief. I felt a surge of satisfaction as I realized that I had exposed the truth, not just for myself but for everyone who had ever been marginalized in this toxic family dynamic. The tension in the room shifted, and I could sense the shift in power. Emily was no longer the queen of her wedding. She was a woman caught in a web of her own making. I could see her fumbling for words, her confidence evaporating as the truth hung heavy in the air. As the whispers grew louder, I felt a rush of validation. I had cut the strings that had bound me to Emily's toxic behavior. This was my moment of freedom. I had taken back my voice, and I was no longer going to be silenced. As the reality of the situation sank in, I could see the guests slowly starting to turn against Emily. The laughter that had once surrounded her faded into whispers of disbelief and judgment. I had finally broken the cycle, and it felt exhilarating. I had chosen to speak up, and in doing so I had reclaimed my power. The aftermath of my revelation left Emily scrambling to regain control, but it was too late. The damage was done, and I watched as she faced the consequences of her actions. The weight of my own silence had been lifted, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had stood up for myself and there was no going back. I was finally free from her shadow. "I have something to say," I announced, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on me. The atmosphere shifted as a heavy silence fell over the crowd. I could see the confusion on some faces, curiosity on others, and a flicker of fear in Emily's eyes. This was the moment I had been building up to, and it felt both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. I could almost hear my heart pounding in my ears as I prepared to reveal the truth that had been buried beneath the surface for far too long. "Emily has been hiding something from all of you," I continued, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. The anticipation in the air was thick, and I could sense the tension rising. "She's been having an affair with Mark's best friend." Gasps rippled through the room like a wave, and I watched as Emily's face drained of color. The laughter that had filled the air moments before was replaced by shocked whispers and wide-eyed stares. I felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through me as I realized the weight of what I had just done. This was it, I had finally taken back my voice and my power. Emily's expression morphed from shock to fury in an instant. Her eyes narrowed as she tried to process my words, and I could see the anger boiling just below the surface. "You ruined my wedding," she shouted, her voice laced with venom. "You're the one who's selfish." The crowd was still in disbelief, but I stood firm, refusing to back down. I had expected chaos, but the silence that followed my revelation was deafening. I felt a surge of liberation as I continued. "You've been living a lie, hiding behind this perfect facade, while treating me like a doormat. 4 years I've sacrificed my happiness to make you look good, to keep the peace, and I'm done." The guests looked from me to Emily, their expressions a mix of shock and intrigue. I could see some of Mark's family whispering among themselves, and I knew that the truth was finally out. The whispers grew louder, and I could hear snippets of conversations about Emily's betrayal, her selfishness, and the facade she had maintained for so long. Mark stood there, his face pale as he processed the bombshell I had just dropped. The confident bride who had been the center of attention just moments ago was now exposed, her reality crumbling around her. I felt a rush of satisfaction as I watched Emily's bravado fade, her carefully constructed world beginning to unravel. "How could you do this to me?" Mark's voice cut through the tension as he turned to Emily, his expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. I could see the realization dawning on him, the betrayal hitting him hard like a punch to the gut. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, and in that moment I felt a surge of vindication. This was the truth she had tried so desperately to hide, and now everyone knew. Emily's face twisted in anger, and I could see her scrambling to regain control. "You don't know what you're talking about, Sophia. This is all a lie." She spat, but her words lacked conviction. I could see the cracks in her facade, and it felt amazing to witness her unraveling. The guests were no longer looking at her with adoration. They were eyeing her with judgment and disbelief. I felt a sense of freedom wash over me as I realized that I had finally stepped out of her shadow. The years of being the invisible sister, the one who always played the supportive role, were coming to an end. I had broken the cycle, and there was no turning back now. The murmurs among the guests grew louder, and I could hear phrases like, "What a scandal!" and "I can't believe she would do that," floating through the air. It was surreal to stand there, watching Emily's perfect wedding day turn into a nightmare. I felt a rush of empowerment. I had taken the leap and exposed her truth, and it felt liberating. Emily's friends, who had once surrounded her with admiration, began to distance themselves, their expressions shifting from support to skepticism. I could see them exchanging glances, unsure of how to react. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a reality check for everyone involved. Emily was no longer the beloved bride. She was a woman caught in a web of her own lies. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had stood up for myself, and in doing so, I had exposed the truth that had been hidden for far too long. The tension in the room shifted, and I could sense the power dynamic changing. Emily was no longer in charge. She was vulnerable and exposed. I felt a rush of validation as the guests began to react, the whispers growing louder, the judgment more pronounced. I had finally cut the strings that had bound me to her toxic behavior, and it felt exhilarating. In that moment I realized that I had not just reclaimed my voice, I had also reclaimed my identity. I was no longer the sister who existed in the background, the one who always sacrificed her happiness for the sake of others. I was Sophia, a woman who deserved to be seen and heard, and I was finally ready to embrace that truth. As the chaos unfolded, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had taken control of my narrative, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. The aftermath of my revelation left Emily scrambling to regain her composure, but it was too late. The damage was done, and I watched as she faced the consequences of her actions, her world crumbling around her. I stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. I had broken free from the chains of resentment and bitterness, and I felt a newfound sense of liberation. The truth had set me free, and I was no longer willing to accept anything less than I deserved. Instead of remorse, Emily exploded in anger. "You ruined my wedding, Sophia. You're the one who's selfish." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the stunned silence like a knife. I could see her face flush red with embarrassment and fury, her eyes blazing as she shot me a glare that could burn a hole through steel. I stood my ground, feeling a surge of empowerment rising within me. I had expected chaos, but the chaotic energy in the room was more palpable than I had imagined. The collective gasp of the guests hung in the air, thick with disbelief and shock, as they processed what I had just revealed. I could see the whispers start to ripple through the crowd, like a wave washing over everyone. Some guests looked at Emily with pity, while others regarded her with a newfound judgment. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I watched her try to regain the upper hand, but it was clear that the facade she had built was crumbling fast. Her perfect wedding day was slipping away from her, and I felt a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. Mark stood frozen, his glass of champagne nearly spilling as he processed my revelation. The disbelief etched across his face was something I hadn't anticipated. He looked from me to Emily and back again, searching for answers in the chaos. "How could you do this to me?" He finally managed to choke out, his voice trembling with hurt and betrayal. The pain in his voice was palpable, and for a brief moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. But I quickly brushed it aside. This was about more than just me. It was about breaking the cycle of toxicity that had defined our relationship for far too long. As I stood there, I could see the crowd starting to shift. Friends of Emily's began to murmur among themselves, casting doubtful glances in her direction. The whispers grew louder, filled with phrases like "what a scandal," and "I can't believe she would do that." And I felt a rush of validation. This was the moment I had waited for. The moment when the truth finally came to light. Emily's anger morphed into desperation as she tried to deflect the blame onto me. "You're just jealous," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted what I have." I could see the cracks in her armor, the vulnerability that lay beneath her anger. "No, Emily," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "This isn't about jealousy. This is about you treating me like I'm invisible for years. You've used me as your doormat and I'm done. You've built your life on lies, and it's time everyone knew the truth." I could feel the energy in the room shift further, as more guests began to side with me. I was no longer the invisible sister. I was the one who had the courage to stand up and speak out. The tension in the air was thick as Emily continued to lash out, her words filled with venom. "You're ruining everything. This is supposed to be my special day," she shouted, her voice rising in pitch. In that moment I realized that she was more concerned about her image than the truth. Her selfishness was on full display, and I felt a sense of liberation wash over me as I stood my ground. The guests began to turn their attention away from Emily and towards me, their expressions shifting from shock to support. I could see some of Mark's family members nodding in agreement, their faces reflecting the disbelief they felt towards Emily's actions. I knew this was a pivotal moment, not just for me but for everyone who had ever felt silenced or overlooked. It felt like the tide was finally turning in my favor. Emily's best friend, who had been right by her side just moments ago, now looked conflicted. I saw her whispering to another guest, her eyes darting between Emily and me. The cracks in Emily's perfect facade were widening, and I felt a rush of satisfaction knowing that I had pulled back the curtain on her deception. I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was the moment I had dreamed of, the moment when I could finally take control of my narrative. "You might have had everyone fooled, Emily, but not anymore. You can't keep hiding behind this perfect image while treating the people who love you like garbage. It's time for the truth to come out, and I'm not going to let you silence me any longer." As I spoke, I saw the guests shift their focus back to Emily, their expressions filled with disbelief and judgment. I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me, realizing that I had taken a stand not only for myself but for everyone who had ever felt belittled or silenced. I was no longer just the sister in the background. I was a woman who had finally found her voice. The room buzzed with anticipation as Emily's world began to unravel. Instead of fighting back, she seemed to be losing her grip on the situation. I watched as the realization hit her. This moment was not just about her wedding day anymore. It was about her life, her choices, and the consequences that came with them. The facade of her perfect life was crumbling, and I felt a sense of satisfaction at having played a part in revealing the truth. As the murmurs grew louder and the judgment became more pronounced, I felt a rush of liberation. I had finally stepped out of Emily's shadow, and it was exhilarating. I was ready to embrace my newfound freedom, no longer willing to be anyone's doormat. I could see Emily's face contorting with anger, but I knew that this was just the beginning of my journey towards reclaiming my voice and my power. In that moment, I realized that standing up for myself was not just about exposing Emily's lies. It was about breaking free from the toxic patterns that had defined our relationship for far too long. I had taken a stand, and I was no longer afraid of the consequences. This was my moment of empowerment, and I was ready to embrace it. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt an unexpected sense of calm wash over me. I had stood up for myself, and in doing so, I had exposed the truth that had been hidden for far too long. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could practically feel the weight of secrets slipping away. Emily's carefully constructed world was unraveling before everyone's eyes, and I felt a surge of empowerment at the sight. Mark turned to Emily, his expression a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. "How could you do this to me?" His voice trembled, and I could see the hurt etched on his face. It was clear that my revelation had shattered his image of her, and I felt a twinge of guilt for the pain I had caused him. But guilt was nothing compared to the relief of finally being free from Emily's shadow. Emily's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but the faces that had once admired her now looked at her with skepticism. The whispers grew louder, and I could hear snippets of conversations like, "I can't believe she would do that. And she seems so perfect, how could she betray him?" It was surreal to witness the shift in perception. I had finally thrown off the chains that had bound me. "This isn't just about you, Emily," I shouted, my confidence growing with every word. "You've treated me like I'm invisible for years, and you think you can just waltz through life without facing the consequences of your actions? It's time everyone sees you for who you really are." The crowd was torn. Some were clearly shocked, while others began to nod in agreement with me. I could see some of Emily's friends looking uncomfortable, shifting their weight as they processed the situation. The loyalty they once felt for her was crumbling under the weight of the truth. It felt liberating to know that I had sparked a change in how people perceived her. Emily's face contorted in anger and desperation. "You don't know what you're talking about, Sophia. You're just trying to ruin my life." Her voice was shrill, but I stood my ground. I could see the cracks in her facade, and I relished the moment. This was the moment I had dreamed of, watching her unravel, watching her lose control. "I'm not trying to ruin your life, Emily. I'm trying to reclaim mine," I replied, feeling empowered. "For years I've been your doormat, and I'm done being your punching bag. You can't keep lying and expecting everyone to fall in line behind your perfect image. It's time for you to face the music." The crowd was buzzing, and I could feel the energy shifting. I had turned the tide, and I wasn't going to back down now. Emily was losing her grip, and I felt a rush of satisfaction as I realized I had finally taken control of my story. I was no longer the invisible sister. I was the one who had the courage to speak up. Mark stood there, his jaw clenched, his expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. I could see him grappling with the reality of Emily's betrayal, and I felt a sense of vindication. He had been a pawn in her game just like I had, and now he was starting to see the truth. "You've built your life on lies, Emily," I continued, my voice steady. "And it's time for everyone to know who you really are. You can't keep hiding behind this perfect facade, while treating the people who love you like garbage." The guests began to murmur amongst themselves, their expressions shifting from shock to judgment. I could see the realization dawning on them, the understanding that they had been deceived. Emily had been living a lie, and now that lie was exposed. It felt exhilarating to witness the reaction of the crowd as they began to turn against her. Emily's bravado was fading, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She was losing control of her narrative, and for the first time I felt powerful. I had taken a stand, and I was no longer afraid of the consequences. The truth had set me free, and I was ready to embrace my newfound freedom. As Emily stumbled over her words, trying to regain her composure, I felt a sense of liberation. I had finally broken free from the chains of resentment and bitterness that had held me captive for so long. I had exposed her for who she truly was, and there was no going back. The feeling of empowerment was intoxicating, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically, and I could see the guests beginning to rally around me. They were no longer looking at Emily with adoration. They were questioning her every move. The whispers grew louder, and I could hear phrases like, "I can't believe she would do that to him," and "What a scandal." It was surreal to witness Emily's carefully crafted image crumble, right before my eyes. In that moment I realized that the truth had not only set me free, it had also freed those around me from the illusion of who Emily had pretended to be. I felt a rush of validation as I stood tall, finally embracing my identity as Sophia, a woman who deserved to be seen and heard. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and I could see the guests casting judgmental glances at Emily. I felt a sense of satisfaction as I watched her world spiral out of control. She was no longer the queen of the day. She was just another person facing the consequences of her actions. I had finally taken a stand, and in doing so I had reclaimed my voice and my power. In the aftermath of my revelation, Emily and Mark were left to deal with the fallout of their shattered relationship. I walked away from the wedding, feeling a mix of relief and liberation. I had finally taken a stand for myself, and no longer did I need to carry the burden of being the lesser sister. I had cut the strings that bound me to her toxic behavior and reclaimed my dignity. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. No more would I be the scapegoat, the one who silently endured the insults and the belittling remarks. I had faced the chaos and emerged victorious, not through reconciliation but through my own strength. I didn't care if they spoke poorly of me or if Emily tried to twist the narrative. I had found my voice, and it was powerful. As I focused on my life, I surrounded myself with people who truly valued and respected me. Friends who celebrated my victories, no matter how small, and who were there to lift me up instead of tearing me down. I realized that my happiness didn't depend on seeking approval from someone who had always put me down. If I ever heard from Emily again, it would be a simple, formal exchange. I was finally at peace with the distance that had grown between us. The victory wasn't in revenge. It was in my newfound autonomy, and the knowledge that I didn't need her or her toxic behavior in my life. I had embraced my truth, and it felt incredible. The silence that followed my declaration was a sweet reminder of my strength. I had stepped away from the chaos and into a life filled with peace and self-acceptance.